Hello, Facebook family. I just wanted to take a moment and just be able to just express some thoughts that I've had regarding the recent events that are happening in our nation. I've taken time to just reflect after listening to several commentaries, people posting on Facebook, as well as listening to reporters and entertainers and so forth, to be able to express their thoughts. So I want to take the time out as well to be able to do the same. And I want to start first off with just framing the contents of the conversation when you dealing with the word racism, because that's a word that you commonly hear, but I don't think that we have a common definition of what racism is. So I want to start first off when you're just thinking about any word that ends in ISM, like communism or capitalism. So anytime you find a word that has ISM on the end of it, which is a suffix, we're talking about an ideology. So an idea that has produced a system. When you're talking about capitalism, it's an idea about how to do business in an economy, as far as economic wise. So it's an idea that has produced standards, policies, and procedures, and so forth. So when you're talking about racism is an idea that has produced a system. And from that system is produced policies, practices, and procedures. Okay? So a workable definition of racism is a system of injustice against people of color. So we're talking about a system of injustice against people of color. And I want to take that time to define it, because too many times when we think about racism, first thing come to mind is white people. Or in this case, police. And I like to go deeper, because if you don't accurately define the problem, you will never be able to correct it. It's like going to a doctor and you don't tell the doctor exactly what's going on. So how can the doctor be able to assess, to be able to determine the cause of your problem, to be able to treat you? So when we're thinking about society, we're sick. So we got to be able to identify correctly what the problem is. So we're talking about, again, sticking with the narrative, the word racism. So it's a system of injustice against people of color. So don't think about white people, but think about the ideas that are generally accepted by white America. Now, I'm not saying, and I don't want to get it misconstrued, that I'm saying that all white people are racist, because I'm not. I'm not saying that at all. I'm talking about the idea that produces a behavior that determines how you treat people of color unjustly, because of that idea that you've accepted. So racism, and we see it in all facets of society, because remember, now we're talking about a system. Because when you're talking about racism, again, we're talking about a system that has produced policies, procedures, and practices, as well as laws. So when we're talking about systems, let's define that. So when we're talking about system, we're talking about the system of government. Because even when you look at our own government, especially when you're talking about the Constitution, and you think about the Constitution, African Americans are not even considered fully human. Because when you think about our votes that an African American casts for any elected official, our votes are only counted as a 3/5 of a whole vote. Because in the Constitution, we only considered as 3/5 human. And you're like, wow, how could that be written in the Constitution? Because you got to go back and understand the history. Because the Constitution was written around about the mid 1700s, and that was during the time where slavery was widely, let me say commonly, accepted as the norm. So when they wanted to do away with slavery, there were several states that were opposing that law. And this was back in a time when America was only 13 colonies. So to be able to pass a law during that time, all 13 states had to unanimously agree. So with several states opposing abolishing slavery, what they did to be able to come to a compromise to have it unanimously accepted to abolish slavery, African Americans were not considered to be full human beings. And that's sad. But that's in the Constitution. Okay? So then when you think about the system of education and banking, when you think about the standardized testing in education, the history books that depict African Americans not as intellectuals or equals, but mostly as slaves, people that need to be told what to do but couldn't think for themselves. No one is considered as innovators. Even when you think about the history, you get the shortest month out of the year to even be able to talk about your history. But that's a whole nother subject. So let's just talk about the procedures and policies. Let's consider financing, banking. All right. So when you think about racism and how it's inwoven in produced systems, especially in banking, education, government. So for instance, I want to start a business, but the area where I want to start a business falls within a certain zip code. Okay. So in banking, what they do to discriminate against people of color, they come with zoning and redlining, meaning that, let's say your zip code in Oklahoma City is 73111. That's generally the northeast part of Oklahoma City, which is predominantly populated by minorities. Okay. So if you want to get a loan to start a business, when you go to the bank, because of those zoning practices and redlining, they're not going to allocate any funds to anyone that falls in that zip code of 73111. So because of the lack of funds, that community now becomes dilapidated, impoverished, which produces a ghetto. So when you think about it, a ghetto is not something that just happened. It was engineered because of the system of racism, because of the unjust policies and procedures that the ideal of racism produces. And I understand a lot of us as people, we are highly upset. And I understand it because I'm upset too. But we got to understand, to be able to change this, number one, we need to expose it. Number two, we need to put laws in place that would eradicate and confront the unjust systems and procedures and policies that are in place that perpetuate and disseminate discrimination against people of color. Not only do we need laws in place to do away with that, but also people need to confront it when they are aware of these unjust practices in their areas of influence. If you're a congressman, a senator, school teacher, principal, superintendent, even a parent, because these ideas, you can't attack an idea with a gun to kill it. You can't kill an idea. Because when you're talking about the ideal of terrorism that we're talking about, Bin Laden is dead. But there's another group, ISIS. And I'm just using that for an instance. Because ideas are something that will outlive you. Ideas are something that are passed on. Ideas do not expire. And you can't shoot it to kill it. So you got to think about, how do you change or how do you destroy an idea? You can only exchange it for a better one. See, we have to go back and deal with the ideas that we have accepted as people to be true to us. Because ideas shape your perception of reality. Ideas defines your concepts of truth. Ideas determines and shapes your self-worth on how you see yourself. See, because when you have white America accepting the idea that they are superior than a person of color, that is because they've accepted that idea that white people are superior. When you hear statements like our country, our land, you're stating like you own this land. And that's not the truth. So now you coming at this as a sense of entitlement or something that you control because of your color. And you got to think about, where does these ideas come from that will put one color superior of another? That's a good question. See, and you would have to go all the way back to the Greeks, because that's a Greek idea. Most of y'all probably did not know that. That is a Greek idea, because you got to think about the Greeks, and that's where most of our philosophy that are taught in our institutions, far as universities, schools, elementary, high school, and so forth, come from the Greeks. Now, have you heard of the philosopher of Socrates, Aristotle, Plato? It's just to name a few. So the Greeks, they believed in the gods, okay? And they believe that the gods chose you to be a leader if you had white skin, pointed nose, blonde hair, blue eyes. They called that theory birth traits. Birth traits. So they would look for birth traits in certain individuals, and that would determine if this person was a leader or if this person was going to be a follower. This person was going to be superior or a slave. All right. So you had birth traits. Then you had charisma, where you get the word charismatic. Okay. Charisma means gifts of the gods. That's what the word charisma means. Gifts of the gods. So the charisma that they would look for, or what we use commonly, words like extrovert. Somebody who asserts themselves. So they would say this person here is an extrovert, or someone who can communicate and articulate themselves very well. There was a gift of the gods called rhetoric, and that was looked at as superior to those who could not articulate themselves very well. So in those days, let's say if you're dark complected, broad nose, broad lips, and if you were educated, to them, you would just be an educated slave. See? So it wasn't about the character or the intellectual capacity of a person. It was about the skin color that they determine if you were superior or inferior. So you got to think about, okay, then how did this ideal of superiority get spread throughout the world? So you have to go back and you have to understand history. When the Romans conquered Greece, you will hear in some circles that even though Rome conquered Greece military-wise, Greece conquered them culture-wise, because the Romans were different from any kingdom that had preceded them. When the Romans conquered a land, what they would do, instead of uprooting the people out of their native land and taking them to Rome, they would have what they call a governor. And what the governor would do, the governor would get orders from Caesar. Caesar was their king, like a president, okay? So whatever Caesar would say, it would be communicated to the governor that would be in that territory, and then that governor would have, for a better word, statesmen. And they would disseminate the laws of Caesar in that land. So it would be just like Rome had been extended to another territory, and then they transformed that territory to be just like Rome. Does that make sense? All right. So what Rome did when they conquered Greece, the Romans fell in love with the Greeks' libraries, because the Greeks, they were considered as intellectuals. They documented their thoughts and their theories. And that's when they come up with philosophers. Okay? Philosophers, when you think about that word philosophy, it's a Greek word. Okay? Philo, which means love. Osophy, to think. So a philosopher is someone who fell in love with their thoughts, and they thought about them constantly to where their thoughts became their own concepts of truth. That's what a philosopher is. So the Greeks, they came up with theories that are based off of, that we base leadership curriculums from. Okay? The Greeks they studied human behavior. Systematic study of human behavior. They studied manipulation mechanisms, how to control crowds, human authority. Okay? So I'm just sharing this with you now so you can understand how these ideas were spreaded through the known Western world. So you can understand why people are of Caucasian descent believe in these ideas. And again, I'm not saying all, but we need to understand we're dealing with an idea. We're not dealing with people. We're dealing with the ideas that the people have accepted to be true to them. So we need to talk about solutions. How do we address these ideas? And you know, I just gave a few. If you're a congressman, statesman, councilman, judge, president, superintendent, teacher, even a parent, we can all impact our areas of influence that we had and be able to spread the right ideas. The right idea, like all mankind were created equal. See, that's God's idea. Because the word says that God created man in his image and likeness. So that means that we all were created in the image of God. That's why we are spiritual beings. We shouldn't identify ourselves by the color of our skin, because the color of our skin is not even who we are. The color of our skin came from the dust of the ground. And I'm just from a biblical perspective. Because the Bible talks about a part that man was created. And then it talked about how God formed the man from the dust of the ground. The dust is just the form of the man, but it's not the man. It's just the form that the man lives in. So when you're talking about man, in the Hebrew, that word man means created spirit. That's where we get the word human from. Human, humus man. Human means dirt or earth. Man means spirit. So when you put the word together, we're talking about a spiritual being in a earth body. Does that make sense? Because if God created mankind in his own image and likeness, then you must ask, what color is God? God is a spirit. So that makes us spiritual beings, because we are his offsprings. So we need to stop identifying with not even the significant part of who we are. We identify with dust, and we're not dust. Our bodies are dust, but we are spirit. See, that idea need to be taught. Now just think about it. If you were a father and the skin color you have is Caucasian or African American or Latino, and you taught your children these ideas that God created you out of his image and likeness. So that makes you spirit, son, not Hispanic. You are a spiritual being that live in a light brown suit. And if you're an African American father and you tell your son that, you're teaching your son that you are a spiritual being, son, in the exact image and likeness of God, son. You are not black, you are spirit, but you live in a dark suit. That's just the color of the dust, son. But that's not who you are. That's just the dust that the real you lives in. And you did the same thing as a Caucasian. You never taught your children to identify themselves by their color, but to identify themselves with who they are, which is spirit. So when my son who's African American, your son who's Caucasian, and your son who's Hispanic, when they see each other, they would never see the color as who they are. They would know that they are spirit. So we would do away with racism just with that idea as parents, teaching our children right ideas. We need to stop perpetuating and disseminating ignorance. Jim Crow is dead. Willie Lynch is dead. The governor of Alabama back in 1963, George Wallace, he's dead. But the ideas that they embrace still live on. Because we as parents, we're continually teaching those ideas to our children, and we should not do that. You know, I had to confront my own ideas that I grew up with thinking that all white people were evil, all white people were devils. And then I was put in a situation where I took a look at my own ideas. I did some introspective thinking, and that's what we must do as people. My childhood best friend, his mother was white, and I lived with them for a few years. And during that time, she treated me just like she treated her own biological son. Whatever she did for him, she did for me. And she was the first woman other than my biological mother that I called mom, because she loved me like my mother did. And it changed my whole perspective on how I seen Caucasian people. I knew that they were not all evil. See, and that's my own bad idea that I took time out to confront. What are the bad ideas that you are holding on to and you know they're not right, but you will not relinquish them? See, then let's talk about another solution. Let's say if I'm a senator, I live in a prestigious neighborhood, and most of my neighbors are business owners, other lawyers, congressmen. We should have town hall meetings that we get to know each other as people. And we're able to confront these ideas that perpetuate social injustice. Because if you're a judge and you've been taught that you are superior based off your color, and a person, a minority, a person of color is inferior to you, is not considered a human being, but a savage, a menace to society, or in the words of Hillary Clinton back in the 90s, a super predator. Do you think an African American that appears before a judge with those type of ideas are going to be able to administer justice? No. Think about the laws that were passed in the 90s during the Clintons. And I'm just sharing this with you because we need to confront these policies, procedures, laws, practices that perpetuate and disseminate injustice against people of color. Think about the mandatory minimums, the 3-strike laws. Bill Clinton put more people in prison than all the presidents that had preceded him. Check the history. So think about it. Even when we're thinking about our hiring practices, let's say if you don't want to be blatant and say that you're racist or you discriminate against people of color, what you do is you put policies in place. Let's say if I want to get a job at Devon Energy or Chesapeake, and I'm just using this as an example. I'm not saying that these are the practices that they go by. I'm just using this as an example. We're theoretically speaking. So they have a policy in place saying they are only accepting applicants that have a character reference from an existing employee at Chesapeake. Now, what's the chances, me being African American, and I get a degree from a prestigious university in accounting, who's to say that I'm going to know Bob that works at Chesapeake that'll be able to write me a character reference so that my resume could be accepted? I'm not going to know him. So automatically, I'm already discriminated against. You follow what I'm saying? And even statistically wise, a person of color, African American, who has the same degree as a Caucasian would be twice as likely to be unemployed. So even with a degree, I'm still have to deal with the systems, the policies, and the procedures and the practices that perpetuate social injustice against people of color. I want us to be able to think, family. We can't attack this with guns. We got to attack this by using our mind and creating laws and policies and procedures that will eradicate the system of injustice against people of color. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you, and you invest the time to listen. Love you, family. I hope this word brings soothing to your heart. It's like a spark for change for the better. Love you.